Want to welcome you guys back to another episode of Pistons Talk podcast presented by FanDuel. Hope you guys are having a great night so far. In tonight's episode, what we'll be discussing is extension talks. It's not Jalen Duren, don't worry. It's actually Ausar Thompson. He is extension eligible, and there have been reports that the Pistons do want to get a deal done with Ausar Thompson. So what we're going to do is look at two different tiers. Tier 1 and Tier 2. I made graphics for you guys to follow along if you're watching live on YouTube. If you're an audio listener, I will be reading these graphics that I did make in Photoshop. But let's get into tonight's episode, you guys. With the defensive season that Ausar Thompson had, being a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year, making first team all defense, we saw how impactful of a defender Ausar Thompson is and how much he is important to the core that the Pistons are trying to build. And there have been reports about what a possible extension for Ausar could look like. This number and this figure, 5 years, 162, does come from Bobby Marks. This was part of his article very early on in the offseason, and he kind of projects Ausar at that $32.5 million price point range. And as you guys can see, what he put up this season with the Pistons, I'll just read the stats real quick if you guys aren't too familiar with what Ausar did this past season. 9.9 points a game, 5.7 rebounds, 3.1 assists, led the NBA in steals at 2 steals a game, 0.9 blocks, shot 52.5% from the field, 57.1 from the free throw line, and 25% from 3. So the projections that some front office analysts like Bobby Marks is 32.5 a year, $162 million, and that's kind of like the price range of what they're anticipating with this extension. Now we're going to be looking at players that are in the tier 1 that are similar to Ausar Thompson. So let's look over a few of these players that I have projected that are similar to Ausar. The first player we're going to talk about in the tier 1 extension comparisons is from the Atlanta Hawks. It's Dyson Daniels. So he extended with Atlanta 4 years, $100 million. The AAV on that is $25 million a year, you guys. This past season, he averaged 11.9 points per game, 6.8 rebounds, 5.9 assists, 2 steals per game also, 0.4 blocks, shot 51.7 from the field, 18% from 3. I have no idea what happened to the kid's three-point shot. It's getting worse. I don't know how, because he was like a 30% three-point shooter and he dipped down to 18%. But this is me rambling a little bit. 61.5 from the free throw line. Now, obviously, with Dyson, his restricted free agency, his representation and his camp wanted more than the $25 million that Atlanta did give him, and they kind of met in the middle. Now, Ausar's projections 32, not 25. I think at the lowest with Ausar, you're probably looking at 28. But I think if you're talking about a defender and a player that isn't really known for his offensive game, I think Dyson Daniels and Ausar Thompson are actually kind of comparable in a sense where they're very good defenders. They can pass the rock. They can rebound. They're just on-ball menaces. They can generate a lot of steals and deflections. So that's why I did put Dyson Daniels in the Tier 1 extension comparisons. He's one player we're going to be looking at. Next player we're going to be looking at is Jaden McDaniels from the Minnesota Timberwolves. With McDaniels, when we look at his contract extension with the Minnesota Timberwolves, he signed a 5-year, $136 million deal, and the AAV on that, you guys, is around $27 million to be exact. So $2 million more dollars than what Dyson Daniels was. But if you look at the offensive production, he has shown that he's more of a two-way wing. So 14.8 points per game this season, 4.2 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.1 steals, 1 block, 51.5% from the field, 41.2 from 3, and 83.5 from the free throw line. So Jaden McDaniels is kind of like a sweet spot because Ausar's extension would be 32.5. His is at 27. So I think that's like kind of like a meet in the middle price for the Pistons to kind of look and say like, hey, like Jaden McDaniels is a defender too. Maybe not as good as a defender as you are, but he actually is productive offensively as well. So I think he's a good name to kind of, put comparisons with. Obviously, he's not at the 162, he's at the 137, but he's one name that I think is a number that we could kind of look at as a projection for Ausar Thompson. One of the next players I wanted to talk about in this tier 1 extension comparison is Luguentz Dort. He actually just got traded to the Atlanta Hawks, but the extension he did sign with OKC was a 5-year, $82.5 million deal. Now, this was before the recent salary cap spike and increase, but this past season with OKC, he put up 8.3 points a game, 3.6 rebounds, 1.2 assists, 0.9 steals, 0.4 blocks, shot 38.5% from the field, 34.4 from three, and 75.9 from the free throw line. I think we could all agree Luguentz Dort is easily a $100 million extension player. Atlanta even said that they want to get a deal done, an extension done with him. Now, whether that is right now or maybe they wait until next summer, we'll have to wait and see. But I think Luguentz Dort is a defensive player that is in the same conversation as like the Dyson Daniels, the Jaden McDaniels, Ausar Thompson, right? That's why I did mention him in this podcast, in this conversation today. Obviously, his number is only a 60.5. He's easily probably like around the 25 to $27 million range. It'll be interesting to see what Atlanta can kind of like get him down to. But he's a player that I think is kind of in that same kind of conversation as a defender. The last player in the tier 1 is more offensive, but still has shown defensive chops throughout his career, and that is Devin Vassell from the San Antonio Spurs. Now, his price point is 5 years, 135, so he did extend for a bigger deal. And this past year with the San Antonio Spurs, he put up 13.9 points per game, 4 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 0.9 steals, 0.4 blocks, 43.7 from the field, 38.4 from three, and 81.5 from the free throw line. And his AAV with his contract extension with the San Antonio Spurs is right at $27 million. So we talk about Dyson Daniels being at 25. We talk about Jaden McDaniels being at 27.2-ish. And then you have Devin Vassell at 135. Obviously, Luguentz Dort is just because of a previous cap space, and the number was a little bit lower. So like that $60.5 million is probably inflated to like at least in the 20s to high 20s, right? But Devin Vassell at 135, I think, is also a player that is comparable. I think he's a little bit more offensive gifted, especially from the perimeter. Attempted over 6 threes a game and made a pretty decent chunk of them, but he's more offensive to me. But I think he still kind of categorizes into being a 3-and-D wing that the Spurs decided to extend. And I think 135 is actually a pretty good price point for the player that he is. So with the tier 1 comparisons, we gave you guys a few examples of defensive-minded wings that extended with their teams, and the lowest contract was $25 million, which was Dyson Daniels, and the highest contract was Jaden McDaniels at a 5-year, $27.2 million extension. Obviously, the cap has gone up. I think that's why ESPN projected Ausar at a higher price point at 32.5 at $165 million over 5 years. Projected contract. Now, it could be anywhere between 25 to 32. Maybe the Pistons and Ausar can meet in the middle and extend, this offseason, because there have been reports pointing to once they're done with Duren, they want to have conversations with Ausar and get those two locked up next to Cade Cunningham. Now, tier 2 extensions, to me, would be the Pistons cannot come to an agreement with Ausar Thompson. And they rolled the dice again in restricted free agency. And the risk with that would be Ausar Thompson could have a breakout season, and he could be way more expensive. Now, the two players that I have listed in tier 2 are two maxed out guys. Never say never, because Ausar could have a breakout season and he could put him in the conversation with both of these players. So we're going to talk about one of the first players in the tier 2, and that is Franz Wagner from the Orlando Magic. Now, tier 2 to me is the max out franchise wings. And Franz extended for 5 years, 224, just like Cade Cunningham. And he has all NBA language that could scale his contract up to 269. But this past season with the Magic, 20.6 points per game, 5.2 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 0.9 steals, 0.3 blocks, 48.1 from the field, 34.5 from three, 82.3 from the free throw line. For a 5-year, $224 million contract, the AAV on that, to be exact, is $44.8 million per year. And if Franz were able to make an All-NBA, that would scale up to $53.8 million to be exact. So the Magic view Franz as a franchise pillar, and obviously the points per game production kind of speaks for itself. The only knock on him really has been health and availability. Like, we know how good of a player Franz Wagner is. He's developed a lot since his Michigan days. We just saw the Magic in the playoffs, and he was giving Cade a lot of difficulties defensively, and the Pistons were down 3-1, large part because of Franz Wagner defense on Cade Cunningham. But that is one extreme example of Ausar not being able to get an extension done with the Detroit Pistons and just has a huge breakout season. Again, I think for him to be in the tier 2 conversation, you don't get extended this offseason, and you're able to have an offensive production almost doubled or close to doubled, because he's at 9.9 points per game this past offseason. Like, let's say he goes from 9.9 to like around 16, 17 points a game. You know, are there conversations of a max or close to a max? So that is the first example. The second example we're going to be getting into is Scottie Barnes from the Toronto Raptors. So let's look at Scottie Barnes's contract and what he extended for with the Toronto Raptors. So with Scottie, very similar. He got the 5 years, $224 million max out contract, the rookie scale max out contract. Now, his scale can be up to 270, based on all NBA triggers. But this past season with the Detroit Pistons, with the Toronto Raptors, he put up 18.1 points per game, 7.5 rebounds, 5.9 assists, 1.4 steals, 1.5 blocks, shot 50.7 from the field, 30.4 from three, and 81.5 from the free throw line. So Scottie Barnes is a franchise guy that the Raptors want to invest and build around. Again, when you look at Franz Wagner or you look at Scottie Barnes, I think that's the type of production Ausar would have to be in the tier 2 conversation. And I think as Pistons fans, like, if Ausar kind of became like in the same conversation as a Franz Wagner offensively, or in the same conversation as a Scottie Barnes offensively, we would be so happy. We could kind of stop like who's going to be the number 2 option talks, because it would be Ausar and Cade. Excuse me. And those were the two that you're going to be building around for the foreseeable future to try to compete for a championship. Excuse me. I got like really bad heartburn right now. I do not know what I ate. I think I had way too much Arab food earlier today. It's just coming up while I'm talking to you guys. But tier 2, I think for the front office would be worst case scenario, because they want to get an extension done with Ausar this summer. And if they roll the dice and he has a season where he's super productive, has a breakout season, kind of like what Jalen Duren just did, his representation might be asking for the max. Now, obviously, 44.8 for a rookie scale max was last year's number. I think this year's number, it's 5 years, 239. So it's gone up a little bit because the cap space has gone up, right? And if you're all NBA, it's not 269 anymore, it's 289. So that's what Duren's extension eligible for, because he made the criteria for making all NBA. So those are kind of things you have to think about if you're a Piston fan when you're trying to lock down your high lottery draft picks like Ausar Thompson and possibly even Jalen Duren. But we're focusing on Ausar on this podcast tonight. I think if I'm Detroit, I'm trying my hardest to get him extended in the tier 1 comparison, because 25 to possibly 32 sounds a lot better than almost $45 million. But it's really dependent on how aggressive the Pistons want to be this offseason to try to get Ausar locked down and get him locked up, because I think we all understand Ausar Thompson as a defender is the Pistons' best defender on the court on a night-to-night basis. He's one of the best perimeter defenders, if not the best perimeter defender. And you've seen when he's on the bench, the defense really does slip a lot. But I'm hopeful the Pistons can kind of group him into the tier 1 extensions with the Jaden McDaniels, the Devin Vassells, the Luguentz Dorts, and the Dyson Daniels. I'm really hopeful that they can, because I think they're pretty serious about getting all of their core guys locked up. You already got Cade locked up. You're trying with Duran, which I think they will meet in the middle and get an extension done. It's just how RFA goes. And then Ausar as well. So you have your core 3 guys locked up for the foreseeable future, and you can start building this thing and building around them. But I did want to make a short podcast for you guys today, because I do think once Duran's deal is done, we'll probably start talking more about Ausar. But I wanted to kind of give examples of players that have extended that are wings as well. But let me know down below in the comment section about what you guys are feeling with Ausar Thompson's extension. What price point would you be comfortable with extending him? Before we do say goodbye, we have to hear from our sponsors from the FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, if you do go over to FanDuel Sportsbook, they have over-unders out, and the Detroit Pistons line this upcoming season in 2026-27 is set at 50.5 wins. And the odds for them to go over that is minus 105. The odds for them to go under that is minus 120. I've been telling you guys all week, I still think it's going to be an over 50.5 wins. I think they can definitely be in the 51 to like 56 range personally, because I look at this roster and it's a good regular season roster. I do think if you want to have deeper playoff aspirations, you're probably going to have to make some deals at the deadline to get more of a secondary score personally, if no one really has any like crazy internal developments. But hey, maybe in this podcast, Ausar does kind of solidify himself as a secondary option next to Cade Cunningham, and his offensive production goes up from maybe like 9 points a game to maybe 15, 16. And maybe we're having different conversations about the second option on this team. But really enjoyed making these podcasts for you guys. We'll talk to you guys very soon. Hope you guys are staying safe. And as always, go Pistons. Peace.